Chapter 9 of my book is about abortion. Since we are here for a fundraiser for the Geauga County Right to Life, I'm going to talk exclusively about Chapter 9. Chapter 9 of my book is The Abortion Holocaust, From Russia Without Love. Before I want to get into my book, I'd like to lay some groundwork here from the Bible regarding the reality of life in the womb. I picked up this pamphlet from the table up front here. This is from Deuteronomy, chapter 30, verse 19. I call heaven and earth to record this day against you, that I have set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore choose life, that both you and your seed, your children, may live. Also, we can establish the reality of life in the womb through the Bible. I have this little booklet here from D. James Kennedy. He has about 11 different quotes from the Bible regarding the reality of life in the womb. I won't read them all. Pastor Sanders has talked about this many times, but I just want to go over a couple of them, lay the groundwork. Okay, in Isaiah chapter 42, verse 2 and 24, it says, Thus says the Lord, who made you and formed you from the womb. Who will help you? Thus says the Lord, your Redeemer, and he has formed you from the womb. So we are told that God is our creator. He created us while we were in the womb. Here's another one, Isaiah chapter 29, verse 1 and 5. Listen, O coastlands, to me, and take heed, you peoples from afar. The Lord has called me from the womb, from the matrix of my mother. He has made mention of my name. And now the Lord says, who formed me from the womb to be his servant. We were formed by the Lord in the wombs of our mothers to be his servant. Let me go to Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 5. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I sanctified you, I ordained you. Before we were formed in the womb, God knew us. God knew us as a spirit, as a soul, before we were placed into the body that's in the womb of our mother. This one is my favorite. This is from Luke chapter 1, verses 41, 44. And it happened, when Elizabeth heard the greeting from Mary, that the babe leaped in her womb, and Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit. Then she spoke out a loud voice and said, Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb. But why is this granted to me, that the mother of my Lord should come to me? For indeed, as soon as the voice of your greeting sounded to my ears, the babe leapt in my womb for joy. Therefore, we know that, and I'm going to talk about the fact that babies in the womb experience pain. They also experience joy. They can leap in the mother's womb. So the Bible tells us the reality of life in the womb. It's not a fetus. It's not a blob of tissue. It's a living, breathing human being. Once we go beyond the Bible, where else do we acknowledge the reality of life in the womb? What does the Declaration of Independence tell us? There's multiple founding documents for the United States of America. But the two I tend to make reference to is the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution. What does the Declaration of Independence tell us? The second paragraph starts out by saying that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that we are endowed by our Creator with unalienable rights. Unalienable means rights that cannot be taken away. Among those unalienable rights are the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We have a right to life which is granted to us by God. What does the Constitution tell us? If you look at the Bill of Rights, in the Fifth Amendment, first of all, the Constitution does not grant rights. What the Constitution does is talk about our pre-existing rights, which a government was formed to protect. And in the Fifth Amendment, it lists several rights that are protected by the Constitution. And one of those rights is granted to criminals. And then the Fifth Amendment says that a criminal cannot be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Think about that. A criminal cannot be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. What's happening with babies in the womb? Are they not being deprived of life without due process of law?
Yeah.
And now people will say, well, in 1973, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in Roe v. Wade that a woman has a constitutional right to an abortion. Therefore, the law has ruled on this issue. Justice Harry Blackmun wrote the majority decision. You may also recall Judge Robert H. Bork. He was nominated to the U.S. Supreme Court by the first George H.W. Bush. But the U.S. Senate did not confirm him for the U.S. Supreme Court. But when the Roe v. Wade decision was rendered in 1973, Judge Robert H. Bork read the opinion that was written by Judge Harry Blackmun. And Judge Bork concluded that there was no constitutional basis for the decision that was rendered. He could find no constitutional principle upon which Roe v. Wade has been decided. And what is the U.S. Supreme Court supposed to do? It's supposed to render decisions on legislation and other activities and determine whether or not they are constitutional. How can they say that abortion, a woman has a constitutional right to an abortion, when in the writings they show no constitutional basis for the decision? Some people say, okay, well, under the Fourth Amendment, there's an implied right to privacy. Because the Fourth Amendment tells us that we have a right to be secure in our papers, in our houses, in our possessions, from unreasonable search and seizure. For that reason, we do have a right to privacy. It doesn't specifically mention privacy, but they say it's implied. But actually, what's implied is that we have safeguards against unreasonable searches and seizures. However, for abortion, the federal government is telling us that we have a right to privacy. But what else is the federal government doing? Under the NSA, how could we have a right to privacy if the NSA is listening to our phone calls? The same federal government that says a woman has a right to privacy and therefore can have an abortion is the same federal government that is reading our emails. It's the same federal government under the IRS that tells us that we have to tell them by April 15th every year how much money we make. This is the same federal government that tells us that we have a right to privacy, yet they monitor our banking transactions. They tell us what kind of light bulb we can have in the privacy of our homes. They tell us how much water we can have in our toilets. Where's the right to privacy? Now, this is a false argument. There's no constitutional basis for an abortion. Okay, what I like to say, and I say this several times in my book, based on Roe v. Wade, based on the fact that perhaps 2/3 of the decisions, or I should say 2/3 of the legislation passed by Congress in this country, simply blatantly unconstitutional, violation of the 10th Amendment. The U.S. government has no constitutional authority to be involved in education, healthcare, and just about everything else that's it's involved in. Those are all restricted to the states. It's stated specifically in the 10th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Therefore, I say we have a constitution and we have a government, but unfortunately, we do not have a constitutional government. And I don't think anybody can argue with that. I talked about it on Pastor Sanders' program. Larry Pratt was the one who brought that up. He said at least 2/3 of the legislation passed by Congress was a blatant violation of the 10th Amendment. We know that abortion is a reality in the United States, has been since 1973. Does anybody know what the first nation was in the 20th century to legalize abortion?
It was
Russia.
Oh, yeah, you said
Russia, in the 20th
yeah.
century. Yeah, in the 20th century, it was Russia. We know that the Bolshevik Revolution occurred in 1917. Actually, there was a series of coups The communist staged a coup in 1917. They ended up being voted out of office, so they staged another coup in 1918. Vladimir Lenin established the Soviet Union in 1922. But 2 years before he established the Soviet Union, and 2 years before he established the Soviet Union, 2 years after he established communism, he legalized abortion in 1920. So communism was actually established in 1918 in Russia. 2 years later, he legalized abortion. And from there, it spread throughout Western Europe, Eastern Europe, spread to the United States, Canada, all over the world. Who else legalized abortion? You know that in Nazi Germany, abortion was legalized. I've heard feminists argue that Hitler was anti-abortion. Hitler was not anti-abortion. He was anti-abortion for people who he believed were members of the Aryan race. He didn't want them to have abortions because he wanted them to take over the world. But he wanted to exterminate everybody else. So he was pro-abortion. We know that after World War II, Nazi leaders were prosecuted by Nuremberg war crimes tribunals for war crimes and crimes against humanity. What was one of those war crimes? What was one of those crimes against humanity that Nazi leaders were actually prosecuted for in the 1940s?
Abortion.
You know what it was? It was for encouraging and compelling abortions among women, among Russian and Polish women. So people say, well, it was a crime against humanity because the abortions were not just encouraged, but also forced upon these women. But an investigator who went through and read the transcripts of those trials stated that the prosecutor, the head prosecutor who prosecuted the Nazis, who I believe was an American, said that abortion was a crime against humanity and a war crime, not only because the women were encouraged and compelled, but protection of the law was denied to unborn children. Those are the exact words. Protection of the law was denied to unborn children. He didn't talk about a glob of flesh in the womb. He talked about the baby in the womb as an unborn child. And again, protection of the law was not granted. That's the same situation we have in the United States today. As I said, there's no constitutional basis for stating that a woman has a legal right to an abortion. There was no constitutional principle upon which the decision was rendered. So today, just like in Nazi Germany, just like in the Soviet Union, children are denied protection of the law in the womb. When that war ended, when the Second World War ended, we prosecuted Nazi leaders for war crimes. There's a war going on in the United States right now. Some people call it the culture war. But what the culture war is the Cold War being fought on American soil. It's precisely what it is. Because the opposing forces are imposing upon us all of the principles and practices that we found in the Soviet Union, in Nazi Germany, in Mao Zedong's communist China, and Castro's Cuba. I said the title of my book is Welcome to Soviet America. The inspiration for that title was a book written in 1932 by William Z. Foster, who at that time was the national chairman of the Communist Party USA. He wrote a book titled Toward Soviet America. And in that book, he laid out his vision of what a Soviet America would look like. What is a Soviet America? It's an American version of the Soviet Union. And I have 19 chapters here where I talk about the things that he said a Soviet America would look like have become a reality today. Also, I based my book on Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto, written in 1848. We know that communism was installed in Russia, 1917 and 1918. But you know that 4 years before 1918, in 1913, the principles of the Communist Manifesto were being installed in the United States. Communism was actually being installed in the United States before it was being installed in Russia. We have the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto. Karl Marx says that in order to establish communism in a nation, we must set up the backbone. And the backbone of communism is those 10 planks. In 1913, 2 of those planks were installed in the United States of America. first the Federal Reserve was set up, is Karl Marx calls for a central bank, a central banking system. That's what the Federal Reserve System is, a central banking system consistent with Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto, consistent with its plans. Also set up was we don't call it the heavy progressive income tax, but that's what Karl Marx called it. In 1913, the personal income tax was set up, which was Karl Marx's heavy progressive income tax. So in 1913, 4 to 5 years, it should say 4 years before communism was established in Russia by Vladimir Lenin and the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks, we had communist principles being installed in the United States of America. How many people know about that? Very few people. In order to really demonstrate that today we are living in a Soviet America. We're not living in the sovereign America, which was created by George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and the rest of the founding fathers. Today we are living in Soviet America. It has become a reality. We are living in the Soviet America that was envisioned by William Z. Foster. And there's lots of ways to demonstrate that, but because this is a fundraiser for Cuyahoga County Right to Life, I'm going to focus on that one issue. We know that in this nation today, Planned Parenthood has more than something like 850 facilities. If you consider all the other facilities where abortions are carried out in America today, there's probably more than 1,000 facilities where abortions occur. Therefore, on a daily basis in this country today, we have nearly 4,000 babies who are being chemically burned and poisoned to death in the mother's womb. Baby in the womb will kick and thrash for 1 hour or 2 hours before it dies. The baby is tormented in the womb for 1 to 2 hours, and no anesthetic is administered to the baby prior to this abortion. I ask you, could that type of activity occur 3,000, 3,500 times or 4,000 times a day in the United States of America? I say it could not. That could only occur in Soviet America. When I was a young kid growing up, a neighborhood woman would come to our house and collect money from the March of Dimes. My mother would contribute to the March of Dimes to prevent birth defects. Now the federal government is giving Planned Parenthood $500 million a year to prevent birth. Not just prevent birth, but to literally torture unborn babies to death. We know that among those almost 4,000 babies who are murdered every day in this country, some of them, instead of dying through a saline solution abortion, they're being killed through surgical abortion. They're having their arms and legs ripped from their bodies. They're having their skulls crushed and ripped from their bodies. And again, this is being done with no anesthetic being administered. We know that up until 2007, we know that in 2003, the U.S. Supreme Court, I should say the Republican Congress, passed a law banning partial birth abortion, signed by George W. Bush into law. Of course, it was contested by the pro-abortion forces. But in 2007, the U.S. Supreme Court stated that the ban on partial birth abortion was constitutional. So today, we can be proud that we have outlawed one horrendous act. Now consider what partial birth abortion is. Seconds before the baby is still in the birth canal. The head is partially removed. Seconds before the baby is to take his or her first breath, an abortionist takes a scissors, cuts a hole to the back of the baby's neck, inserts a tube, and sucks the baby's brains out. Does this with no anesthetic. Could that occur in America? I tell you it cannot. That could only occur in a Soviet America. That could only occur in a Nazi America. A crime against humanity, a war crime like that could never occur in the America that I grew up in as a child. It can only occur in the Soviet America that I'm living in now as an adult. You know, researchers have shown, especially neurologists, have studied babies in the womb. They study their development. Neurologists have determined that by 20 weeks gestation, the baby in the womb has a fully developed central nervous system and it can experience pain. Not only that, certain neurologists, I don't know how they did this, but they've done extensive research of unborn babies in the womb. Neurologists have hooked up EEG machines with recorded electroencephalograph, or the brainwave activities of babies in the womb. And then they subjected the babies in the womb to unpleasant stimuli, to painful stimuli. And they found out that babies in the womb, as early as 20 weeks gestation, record pain. We know that their EEG readings, their brain waves, indicate that they are experiencing pain in the womb at 20 weeks gestation. Other researchers have concluded that we know that we as adults, when we're under stress, stress hormones are released into our bloodstream. So what they did is they studied babies in the womb. And they found out as young as 16 weeks gestation, babies in the womb that are subjected to stress or painful stimuli will secrete stress-related hormones into their bloodstream. Babies in the womb as young as 16 weeks experience discomfort and pain. And yet at the same time, babies in the womb are being killed through saline solution abortion and surgical abortion, and no anesthetic is administered. Now consider this. Some years ago, conservatives introduced legislation to the Congress, and they named it the Unborn Child Pain Awareness Act. The Unborn Child Pain Awareness Act. And what they wanted to do was to pass legislation so that anybody who's administering abortion must inform the mother of the child who's seeking abortion, must inform her that the child in her womb may experience pain during the commission of the abortion. The research has shown that at least at 20 weeks of gestation, even at 16 weeks of gestation, the baby can experience pain. They actually had enough votes in Congress to pass it. But the opposition, the pro-abortion forces, pulled some manipulations and they killed the legislation. What does that tell you about the character of the people that we are up against? These people prevented the abortionists from informing pregnant women that if they seek an abortion, the child within their womb, if it's at least 20 weeks gestation, they're going to experience pain. They prevented that from happening. And what really makes it most horrible is the fact that researchers who have studied babies in the womb have determined that while babies, and some babies at 16 weeks gestation have a fully developed nervous system so that they can experience pain, they do not develop the central nervous system components and other components necessary to blunt pain until 28 weeks gestation. We as full-grown adults, we can experience pain, but we also have biological mechanisms that allow us to blunt pain. Babies in the womb between 16 weeks gestation and 28 weeks gestation have no way of blunting the pain that they experience. Think about that. During a 1 or 2 hour saline solution abortion, where baby is being chemically poisoned and burned to death for 1 or 2 hours, they are experiencing what is probably the closest that any human being can come to experiencing hell on earth. That tells you about the character of the opposition that we're up against. These people this is more of insanity. This is a war crime committed in this culture war. This is a crime against humanity. Also consider this. You know that in 1902, in this country, they passed the Humane Slaughter Act, that certain animals, before they can be slaughtered, they must be given an anesthetic so that they're rendered insensible to pain. So what we have in this country, in Soviet America today, animals that are about to be slaughtered have greater protection from experiencing pain than an unborn baby in the womb. Is that a crime against humanity? Yes, it is. We also know that it was back in 2005, the ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union, which was founded by communists, right? Founded by Roger Baldwin, who said that communism is his goal. He created the ACLU. The ACLU was suing, stating that the lethal injection given to death row inmates was unconstitutional. It was a violation of the 8th Amendment. The 8th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution says that criminals cannot be subjected to what is it specifically? Cruel and unusual punishment. The 8th Amendment says we cannot be, if we're found guilty of a crime, we cannot be subjected to cruel and unusual punishment. So the ACLU says that a lethal injection given to a convicted murderer is cruel and unusual punishment. Why? The death row inmate is given 3 injections. The first one is an anesthetic so that the inmate will experience no pain. The second one is a paralytic drug that paralyzes the person so that they cannot jump around, bounce around, or contract during this procedure. Then the third drug that's administered stops the heart. So what the ACLU is saying, and what the supporters, or I should say the antagonists against capital punishment are saying, is that it's quite possible, or it's theoretically possible, that not enough anesthetic is administered, or it's theoretically possible that the final drug is administered too soon. Therefore, there's a remote possibility that the death row inmate may experience pain during the lethal injection process. Now, these are the same people who will deny an anesthetic to an unborn baby when we know, when it has been scientifically established, that after 16 weeks to 20 weeks, that baby is going to experience pain. So these people are concerned about the remote possibility, the theoretical possibility, that a death row inmate may experience pain during the few minutes that these lethal injections are being administered. Of course, the Supreme Court ruled against the ACLU. The Supreme Court ruled that this is not cruel and unusual punishment. There has been virtually zero, there's been 0 cases where anyone has ever demonstrated that a death row inmate experienced pain as a result of the series of these 3 injections. This is what really upsets me as well. It's not, so far, everything else that I've said upsets me too. This is also some more icing on the cake. We know that the federal government unconstitutionally has passed the Threatened and Endangered Species Act. Under the Threatened and Endangered Species Act, it is a federal crime to kill certain rats, mice, snakes, spiders, and other critters. Not only is it a federal law to kill rats, mice, snakes, and spiders, and bats, it's also against federal law to kill unborn snakes, mice, bats, rats that are on the endangered species list. Think about that. Is this the United States of America, or is this the United Soviet States of America? It could never happen in the United States of America, where the federal government has made it a federal crime to kill an unborn rat, but says there is a constitutional right to torture and kill an unborn baby. Any questions, any comments? Yes, sir.
Well, for one thing, it's not, that law that was stopped in Congress, it didn't prevent a baby killing abortionist from notifying a possible victim of abortion that her baby has suffered pain. She's perfectly free to notify him that.
Good point, excellent point. An abortionist can. The problem is that abortionist has no conscience, so abortionist is not going to care whether or not the baby experiences pain. As a matter of fact, I talk about my chapter, talk about the criminal mind. and I kind of lay the groundwork to explain why these people behave the way they do. And I talk about the psychology of the socialist and the sociopath, the Soviet socialist and the sociopath. Like I say, that they have low moral IQs. They're morally insane. And I talk about serial killers who have stated that they've stated to healthcare professionals, to psychiatrists and psychologists, they stated they enjoy killing. They enjoy inflicting pain. Serial killers who have been caught and sentenced have stated that. What is an abortionist? It's a serial killer who enjoys killing, who enjoys inflicting pain. These people are morally insane. That's what we're up against. But that's a good point. Yes, sir.
I saw a video probably at the end of the 70s or maybe early 80s of some Nazi experiments, and they had a baby that they said was 10 to 12 weeks old, and they touched it on the foot and it pulled its leg back, showing that they do have a response to stimuli. Now that would mean to me that they have a nervous system already.
Absolutely. It's been scientifically established.
But that was in weeks, it wasn't in months.
One pro-life individual says that doctors have heard, you've heard about the silent scream
Yeah.
in the womb.
Yeah.
And also babies, aborted babies have been heard to scream outside the womb as young as 13 weeks. As young as 13 weeks. But like I said, it's been scientifically established beyond all doubt that babies in the womb as young as 16 weeks can experience pain in the womb. And they do not have the ability to blood pain until 28 weeks. Any other questions or comments? Yes, sir.
As far as so-called partial birth abortion, I don't buy into even the concept of partial birth abortion, because I understand a baby will try to, wiggle and get free. And everybody knows when a baby's born, that baby's slippery. I believe if you had cameras in that room, what you'd find is if they tried to do a partial birth abortion, there'd be some babies that would be spared by virtue of the fact they slip out of the grasp of the abortionist, therefore they're totally born, and for an abortionist to say that he does abortion, for an abortionist to be honest, he'd have to admit he's guilty of aggravated murder.
Absolutely, because you see pictures of a partial birth abortion being committed, and just the top of the baby's head is in the birth canal.
Exactly.
That baby is born.
Exactly.
It's seconds away from taking its first breath before it's brutally exterminated. Any other questions or comments?
I wanted to say a couple things when you mentioned. Go ahead, Joe. You had your hand up.
Yes, you mentioned you have a book.
Yes, sir.
Are you selling the book, or can people get your book, or how do they get it?
Yeah, my book, Welcome to Soviet America Special Edition, is available here. It's also available online. It's available at Amazon.com. It's available at BarnesandNoble.com and other top bookstores.
And how much is it? What's the price?
On the internet, it's $19.97, and I'm selling it here for flat $20. And every book that I will sell here, $7 are donated to the Geauga County Right to Life organization. Someone
Okay.
else?
I want to make a point here. I know a little bit about the executions of death row inmates. I've sat right next to a whole lot of them as they've gotten their lethal injection, and I have never seen one experience any pain at all. So that doesn't happen. And everything that you said in your book is absolutely right. For us, sometimes what happens is we've been in this battle so long that we have a tendency to put the gruesomeness in the back of our minds, and we get involved in things like political activity and fundraising to keep our mind off just how evil abortion is, just how, God's word, the Bible tells you to kill a child. You'd be better off to have a millstone which weighs 4,000 pounds hung around your neck and drown. He emphasizes how much he loves children. For those of us, we've been in the battle. You don't like to think about that. You like to put that to the back of your mind and just get out and run to the fight. But now and then, we need to remember, we need to go back, and we need to visit that and think about what is the emphasis, why we are fighting this fight. And he did it. That was very, very good. Good, great presentation. Thank you.
Just curious.